From listening to you guys in class last week, I noticed that you were struggling with what to do when faced with solving an equation. So I wanted to kind of give you this graphic organizer with a couple more examples so you could hear my thinking. You are having a test next class, so it's important that you get this down. So I have kind of set this up, and this is at the top of the page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set things equal to 0, and we're going to look to factor. Okay. And most of you are getting better at factoring. Once we've factored, we're going to set factors equal to 0, and we're going to solve. If something's not factorable, then we're going to use the quadratic formula or completing the square. I put this because we seem to be struggling with that kind of factoring the most. So that is up there so that you see those patterns. And then remember, we'll use the quadratic formula as well. But let's look at the first example, which is 12x cubed minus 3x squared equal to 0. Okay. So when I'm factoring, the first thing I'm always looking for is the greatest common factor. Okay, always looking for that. So in this case, our greatest common factor is 3x squared. And when I factor it out, I get 4x minus 1 and equal to 0. Okay, everything is factored. So I'm going to go ahead and set my factors equal to 0. So I get 3x squared equal to 0 and 4x minus 1 equal to 0. So if I was to divide by 3, x squared equals 0, and x is just the square root of 0 is 0. Because of this squared, this has a multiplicity of 2. So if you're checking to see if your roots are right, that counts as 2 roots, okay, because this should have 3. And then for the 4x minus 1 equal to 0, I'm just going to add 1. And I'm going to get 4x equals 1. And if I divide by 4, x equals 1/4. You don't need to change it to decimal so that you know that your zeros in this case are 0 and 1/4. Okay. My next example is 81 x to the 4th equals 3x. So now this time I have to set it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I get 81 x to the 4th minus 3x equal to 0. Going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is 3x. And that is going to give me 27x cubed minus 1 equals 0. The 27x cubed minus 1 can still be factored. Okay. The 3x cannot, so we do 3x equals 0, so x is going to equal 1. So this is a cubed. Okay, anytime you see that cubed, you should be looking up here at this. Okay, and we're using SOAP for our signs, right? So 27x cubed minus 1, the cube root of 27 is 3. And then x and the cube root of 1 is 1. So same sign. Oops. This should be a plus, plus, minus. So same sign. Opposite, always positive. So 3x squared is 9x squared. Multiply, I get 3x, and square the last term, I get 1. Okay. So now 3x minus 1 equals 0. So 3x equals 1. And then if I divide by 3, x equals 1/3. When you factor perfect square trinomials, or difference of squares, or sum and difference of squares, this trinomial can never ever be factored. So you have to use the quadratic formula completing the square. Because my coefficient is 9, it's not as easy to complete the square as it is to use the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So in this case, my a is 9. It's what's in front of the x squared. My b is 3, and my c is 1. So if I substitute in, I get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 9 times 1, all over 2 times 9. Well, my b is positive this time. Keep in mind that if it was a negative, whenever we square, we're still going to get a positive, right? So always a positive when we square that b. So it's 9 minus 36 all over 18. And then we get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 27 over 18. Okay. Negative 27 is going to factor, or can be simplified to negative 3 plus or minus 3i root 3. Remember, 27 is 9 times 3, and the square root of 9 is 3, and then over 18. Okay. All the numbers on the outside, the thing that's not under the radical, are divisible by 3. So this is going to simplify. I'm going to come over here to negative 1 plus or minus I root 3 over 6. So my zeros here are 0, 1/3, negative 1 plus I root 3 divided by 6, and negative 1 minus I root 3 divided by 6. Look at the next example. The next example is 4x to the 4th plus 35x squared minus 9 equal to 0. Now this is factorable. Okay, so remember, this is the old man in the glasses. For those of you that remember it by that, I'm going to multiply this and this, and it gives me negative 36. So I need factors of negative 36 that add to positive 35, and they are negative 36 and 1. So negative 36x squared and x squared is what we split, or sorry, positive 36x squared, and negative x is what we split that middle term to. So I get 4x to the 4th, and then minus 9, and bringing down the outsides. So we're going to do factor by grouping. Greatest common factor here is a 4x squared. And when I factor that out, I'm left with x squared plus 9. And the second pair, it's a negative 1. And it leaves me with x squared plus 9. That doesn't look like a squared. Okay, so my final factor is 4x squared minus 1 times x squared plus 9 equals 0. Now 4x squared minus 1 can be factored further, but we're okay. We know how to solve a quadratic by just taking the square root, right? Because I have no x to the first. So I can do 4x squared minus 1 equals 0, and x squared plus 9 equals 0. So if I add 1, I get 4x squared equals 1. If I divide by 4, x squared equals 1/4. And then I got to take the square root of both sides. So to do a fraction, right, the square root of 1 is just 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. So it's plus or minus. We have to remember both of those roots 1/2. Okay. And then for the x squared plus 9, if I subtract 9, I get -9. And if I take the square root of both sides here, okay, square root of -1 is I. And then the square root of 9 is 3. So x is going to equal positive or negative 3i. So there are my 4 zeros. 1/2, -1/2, 3i, and -3i. So I've got 4 zeros, and my degree is 4. Okay. Our last example is x to the 4th minus 17x squared minus 18 equals 0. Again, this can be factored, but since there's nothing in front of the x to the 4th, all we need are factors of -18 that add to -17, and that's just going to be -18 and 1. So this just factors to x squared. We're taking half of that, plus 1, and x squared minus 18. So that's factored, and it's factored as far as it can go. So we're going to take our factors and set them equal to 0. So x squared, if I subtract 1, is -1. And if I take the square root of both sides, okay, x squared is equal to positive and negative I. Okay, square root of -1 is I. And if I add 18, okay, x squared equals 18. When I take the square root, I'm going to get x equal to positive or negative. 18 is 9 times 2, so square root of 9 is 3 root 2. So here are my 4 zeros. Positive I, negative I, positive 3 root 2, and -3 root 2. So I hope this helps you in preparing for your test that you have next class, and have a math-tastic day.